Aloha kakahi kaka'u. I'd like to say that I'm happy to be here, but the truth is I'm kind of shocked to be here. I'm a high school teacher, and I don't like cheesecake. Usually we're not asked to do these kinds of presentations, but I think there's a growing interest in what it is that's being taught to our students, and particularly in the area of Hawaiian history. I just want to say a couple of words about this term, Moʻolelo, first before I begin. Moʻolelo means language, but my mother, who is a folklorist, would not be happy if I failed to mention that it's also about orality. So I don't want to overemphasize the textual aspect of what I'm working on. Secondly, Moʻolelo is not just history, but stories. Now, the indigenous writer, Thomas King, has told us that the truth about stories is that that's all we are. And so if our stories are disfigured, then we are not ourselves. So to that purpose, I've been working on a Hawaiian history textbook. I'm just going to really talk about three things: the need, or the why develop a new textbook, the content, or the what would be included, and then most importantly, the perspective, or the how. How is this content going to be delivered? So first of all, the need for a new textbook was articulated by Robin Puanani Danner, who in a published article wrote that textbooks on us and written by us will make great strides in building support and understanding about our people. This single research project alone of producing a solid educational textbook on our people is worth hundreds of other research projects going by the wayside. I beg you to do it. So I read this and I said, okay, 6 years ago. Now, our students are getting history, aren't they? Not everybody actually gets Hawaiian history, but everybody gets US history, which does mention Hawaii a little bit. Recently, I was speaking to an administrator at Kamehameha, and this is a high-up administrator, and he said that when he was in school, this is about 1960, that his textbook said that Queen Lily was overthrown by her people. So there's nothing true in that sentence, right? First of all, the name, obviously, it wasn't her people who overthrew her, and it's actually debatable whether or not what happened in 1893 was actually an overthrow or whether it was an intervention. Now, let's see if any progress has been made over the decades. I just have a couple of samples from current textbooks. The American Republic says, President Cleveland withdrew the Annexation Treaty from the Senate and tried to restore Lili'uokalani to power. 5 years later, the United States annexed Hawaii, period. So it's pretty straightforward, unproblematically presented. Let's take a look if a higher level textbook, Advanced Placement, does any better. A History of the United States says Cleveland tried to restore Queen Lil to her throne. Not until after the Spanish-American War was Hawaii finally annexed by joint resolution of Congress. So it is a little bit better. At least it mentions that the annexation was through a joint resolution and not a treaty. But it doesn't go any further. It doesn't ask the question, can Congress annex by joint resolution? Can Congress annex at all? And furthermore, wasn't the Spanish-American War the point of annexation? They've got it right in that the annexation happened actually the day after the hostilities ended. Well, what about Hawaiian history? So one of the textbooks that the DOE uses, the public schools, says simply, in August 1898, Hawaii was officially annexed to the United States and became the territory of Hawaii. So it's actually inferior to the AP US textbook. It doesn't mention the joint resolution, doesn't mention the lack of a treaty. Now, to be fair and to their credit, one of the authors of this book came up to me because she happened to attend one of my presentations about this and said that they weren't exactly proud of what they had written, looking back in retrospect. They wrote this in the 80s. But what can be done? Well, I would suggest we can, in the meantime, look at primary sources to compensate for the kind of lack of texts. One primary source that people are probably familiar with, but is not mentioned in any textbooks, is the Petitions against Annexation. Now, it's actually debatable about how many people signed this. It was at least a majority, at least over 50%, about 55% of Hawaiians signed the Petitions against Annexation, and possibly as high as 95%. Now, at Kamehameha, this is particularly powerful because my students, if they know their background, they can actually find their ancestors in these petitions. And I have a copy. I think every Hawaiian history teacher should have a copy of this. And in some cases, they can even find their own names, their own last names. So what it really tells them is that while they may be on the fence, they may be undecided about how they feel about Hawaii's relationship with the United States, their kupuna were not. Another primary source, never discussed in any textbooks, is the secret session on annexation that occurred in the US Senate in 1898. Now, if you have really good eyes, you can see that this is a Star Bulletin from 1969. That's because the transcripts weren't released until 71 years after the debate had occurred. Now, that should make you wonder, why do it behind closed doors? But they even call it Hawaii seizure. Well, what was in these debates? Well, obviously I can't go over the entire debate, but I just have a couple of quotes to give you an idea about what was discussed. Senator Bacon in the debate asked, under what power, where is the power to annex Hawaii, which he mentions was a neutral nation and one with which the United States was not at war. Senator Morgan, who is the leader of the annexationists in the US Senate, responds that the president only has powers given to him by the law, and this Congress is enacting a law to enable him to do it and not leave it to his unbridled will and judgment. Now, this actually goes against about a century of narrative that we've been told, because here we're seeing that it's the president who's going to annex Hawaii and not the Congress. We've been told that Congress annexed Hawaii by joint resolution all this time. Now, Senator Morgan, the leader of the annexationists, is saying actually the president's going to do it. So we should be asking ourselves, does the president have the authority to annex? Well, evidence is much stronger that what the president has authority to do is occupy. And that's a different thing altogether. Well, who is this Senator Morgan, by the way? Well, that's John Tyler Morgan. He was a Confederate general in the Civil War and the Grand Dragon for the Ku Klux Klan for the state of Alabama. So that gives you some idea about the motivations behind why these people were doing what they were doing at the time. Why would a racist want to incorporate a nation of Polynesians? You know, it's a valid question. Well, several sources have said that one of his life goals was to resettle African Americans out of the South somewhere else. He looked at the Congo, the Philippines, and Hawaii, and even New England. Oh, by the way, my sources here are not trying to smear him. This is actually lauding him as a great champion of human liberty. So I just want to point out at this point that this is not anti-American. They're talking about in the debate a joint resolution because American senators voted against the Treaty of Annexation. So we need to keep that in mind. It's all beginning to sound a little bit crazy. But in my madness, I have the support of the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who says that the whole conception of benignly seeking the truth is a systematic concealment of the processes in which political powers establish and legitimate themselves through a violent exclusion of those whom they define as beyond the bounds of reason. And what Foucault is really doing here is questioning the ideas of objectivity and neutrality. This could be used to describe me, although I would say reason is exactly the tool that I'm using to try to unravel this history. I want to thank Keanu-sai for the image in the last slide, by the way. Foucault emphasized the power of discourse in the formation of truth. And what I would say is we need a new discourse, one that's informed by Hawaiian perspective. Preferably using old wisdom anew. Now, Lilikala Kamelehiwa has offered us 4 traditional Hawaiian metaphors, which constitute something like a lens through which to view the world, a Hawaiian lens. I can only touch on them briefly, but Malama Aina is really about reciprocal responsibility. Ni'aupio is literally incest, but it's really about power and the right to rule. Aikapu is not about gender separation, gender oppression, but separation to create balance between. You might say it's about pono, which I'm going to talk more about. And then finally, imihaku, 2 paths of seeking mana. We're starting to develop a corpus of Hawaiian philosophical concepts with Manu Meyer's Hawaiian epistemology, or Hawaiian philosophy of knowledge, Puakanahele's Makavalu, literally 8 eyes, which seems to suggest the importance of multiple perspectives within Hawaiian thought, and then my own work, along with some others, on a framework called genealogy, or you might call it mo'okuauhau as a methodology. These are really new frameworks for old wisdom. So I had mentioned pono. Where do we see the application of this? Well, we can see it in things like Kanawai Mamalahoe, the law of the splintered paddle. This was a law from the 1790s, which balanced security and freedom so effectively that the state of Hawaii incorporated it in their constitution. And this is also very relevant today. We see the relevance of this law in the Occupy Honolulu movement. They're actually invoking this law to try to stop the police from seizing their property on the roadside, including this banner in the picture, by the way. So this is not ancient history from the 1790s. This is a current event. And speaking of the state of Hawaii, we all know the motto of the state of Hawaii, Ua mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono. And we're told that it means the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. But if you look at the context in which that was originally stated, it wasn't a poem. It was, well, you know, my students know about the band Sudden Rush, the rap group, who say, Hawaiians, tell me what you want, ea. Life? No. Sovereignty. The sovereignty of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. So on the state seal, emblazoned in large print, is a sovereignty slogan for the Hawaiian kingdom that says that sovereignty is perpetuated. It continues. In other words, the motto of the state of Hawaii denies the existence of the state of Hawaii. I'm not saying that. It says that. Now, this might all start to sound very extreme, but I actually advocate a balanced approach, or you might say a pono approach. And by taking this approach, using the wisdom of our ancestors anew, I think that can be a way to benefit our keiki and our haumana. Mahalo nui a ʻoukou.